Well, we talked to homeowners in this Okeechobee County community, and they say the flooding is just terrible. One gentleman tells me he's been fighting for 4 years, and look, he's still not getting any help.
They drained Lake Okeechobee, and the footage that came back from orbit 48 hours later is the kind of thing federal agencies do not release on a Tuesday afternoon by accident. Black water, not green algae, not muddy runoff. Black, spreading down 2 coasts at once, dark enough to be visible from satellites. Something rose from the bottom of that lake in December 2024, something that had been buried under 9 feet of water for 70 years. And the moment it hit daylight, both Florida coastlines started dying. What you were about to see was not supposed to surface.
Algae is beginning to take over parts of Lake Okeechobee. Take a look. This is a satellite image that was taken of the lake by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA.
The big water lake. Okeechobee is the largest freshwater lake in Florida, 730 square miles, the second largest freshwater lake contained entirely within the lower 48 United States. Stand on the southern shore and you cannot see the northern horizon. Only sky, water, and the slow-moving haze of Florida heat. The Calusa called it Miami. The Spanish called it Laguna del Espiritu Santo. The Seminole called it Okeechobee, which means big water. The name stuck. For more than a century, this lake has been the beating heart of South Florida's water system. It feeds what remains of the Everglades. It supports the agricultural economy of Central Florida. It supplies drinking water to over 8 million people.
The best lake was Lake Superior, and I was just at Lake Superior, looked down at the water, and I could have took a glass and drank it. It was so beautiful. Not the case here.
It is connected by man-made canals to both the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast and the Gulf of Mexico on the west. Here is the part nobody is talking about. When something goes wrong at Lake Okeechobee, it does not stay at Lake Okeechobee. It goes everywhere. In December 2024, the South Florida Water Management District made what was supposed to be a routine decision. The lake's water level was running high. The Army Corps of Engineers, which has managed Okeechobee's outflows since the 1930s, ordered a controlled release, a lowering of the lake by several inches over a period of weeks to protect the aging Herbert Hoover dike, a textbook water management operation, done dozens of times before. Nobody monitoring the gauges that morning had any reason to think this release would be different. 48 hours later, the satellite imagery came in. The wall that was built to contain a catastrophe. To understand why that satellite image stopped a federal water management operation cold, you have to understand why Lake Okeechobee has a wall around it in the first place. The lake is shallow, remarkably shallow for its size. The average depth is only about 9 feet. In some places, you can wade hundreds of yards from shore before the water reaches your waist. That shallowness is what made it dangerous.
There's a little something. Oh, I haven't seen one of these in a long time. Several filaments that are now released from the dying cells, dead cells, or no longer have that competition.
On September 16, 1928, a Category 5 hurricane made landfall near Palm Beach, Florida. Sustained winds of 145 miles per hour drove directly over Lake Okeechobee. The lake had no containment system. It was surrounded by low-lying agricultural land, much of it occupied by black migrant workers who harvested beans, sugarcane, and winter vegetables in the rich muck soil of the Everglades. One of those workers was a man named Coot Simpson, a bean picker living in a labor camp near Belle Glade. The night the storm hit, Simpson climbed onto the roof of a packing shed with 7 other men as the lake rose around them. By morning, 6 were dead. Simpson survived because he tied himself to a beam with his own belt. Days later, when rescuers reached Belle Glade, his story repeated with thousands of variations along the southern shore, and thousands more who had no story left to tell. The official death toll was 2,500. The actual number was almost certainly higher, possibly over 3,000. Most of the victims were black agricultural workers whose deaths were never formally recorded. Mass graves were dug, bodies were burned. The disaster was, at the time, the second deadliest natural disaster in American history, and it was entirely preventable. In the aftermath, the federal government ordered a containment system. The Army Corps of Engineers began work on the Herbert Hoover Dike, a 143-mile earthen levee that would completely encircle Lake Okeechobee, transforming it from a natural lake into a controlled reservoir. By the 1960s, the lake was fully contained. Water could only leave through controlled outlets and spillways managed by the Corps. The lake that had killed thousands was now under human control. That control came with a price nobody understood at the time, and the bill came due in December 2024. The slow poisoning. The dike did its job. The 1928 disaster never repeated, but the moment you wall off a lake, you change what it is. Okeechobee stopped being a lake. It became a sink. Before the dike, the lake had drained naturally southward through the Everglades, a slow-moving river of grass that filtered and dispersed water over hundreds of miles. After the dike, that flow was cut off. The Everglades were drained for agriculture. The land between the lake and the remaining wetlands became the Everglades agricultural area. Hundreds of thousands of acres of sugarcane, vegetables, and cattle ranches. But farming at this scale requires fertilizer, and fertilizer contains phosphorus. For decades, the runoff from those fields flowed into Lake Okeechobee. Phosphorus, essential for plant growth and devastating in excess, accumulated in the lake's waters and eventually in its sediments. The shallow lake acted as a settling pond. Particles sank to the bottom and stayed there, year after year, decade after decade. Let that sit for a second. Every drop of fertilizer washed off those fields since the dike was finished did not leave. It went to the bottom of the lake, and it waited. By the 1990s, scientists were warning that Okeechobee's sediments contained one of the largest reservoirs of legacy phosphorus ever recorded in a natural water body. Under the right conditions, that buried poison could be remobilized, released, sent back into the water column. In December 2024, the conditions changed. If watching a single management decision unleash 70 years of buried poison sounds like the kind of story you wish more people were telling, hit subscribe. We dig into one of these every week. Now, back to the lake, because what the testing actually found in that black water is worse than anyone prepared for. East or west, and both are disasters. Once a lake is walled off, it cannot overflow. That is the whole point. But it also means there are only two ways out. When Okeechobee rises above safe levels, the Army Corps has only two real options. Release water east through the St. Lucie Canal to the Atlantic, or release water west through the Caloosahatchee River to the Gulf. Both options are ecological disasters. Everybody at the Corps knows it. Everybody at the district knows it. They release anyway, because the alternative is the dike failing. The St. Lucie River flows through Martin and St. Lucie counties on Florida's Treasure Coast, eventually emptying into the Indian River Lagoon, one of the most biodiverse estuaries in North America. The lagoon supports over 4,000 species of plants and animals. It is not designed to receive massive pulses of fresh water from a eutrophic lake. When Okeechobee water is released eastward, it floods the estuary, disrupting the salinity balance that marine and brackish species depend on. Worse, it carries the phosphorus and nitrogen that fuel explosive algal growth. Toxic cyanobacteria bloom across the surface. Fish kills number in the millions. Manatees starve as the seagrass beds get smothered and die. The 2016 Treasure Coast bloom was one of the worst environmental disasters in Florida history. Governor Rick Scott declared a state of emergency. The Caloosahatchee on the west coast faces the same dynamics. Releases toward the Gulf feed red tide events, a different type of bloom caused by the organism Karenia brevis, which produces neurotoxins that kill fish by the millions and cause respiratory problems in people who breathe the air near affected beaches. The 2018 red tide killed over 2,000 tons of marine life along Florida's Gulf Coast. Both coasts have been held hostage to Okeechobee's management for decades. But the December 2024 release was supposed to be controlled, modest, safer than the alternatives. What came out of the canals that week did not behave like anything anyone had released before. What was waiting at the bottom? The release was planned by the book, the Lake Okeechobee System. Operating manual, known inside the Corps as LOSUM, the rulebook that tells engineers when to open and close the gates, called for lowering the lake by several inches over a period of weeks, modest by historical standards. Coordinated with state environmental agencies. What the book did not account for was what was sitting at the bottom of the lake, Moving large volumes of water through canals creates turbulence. Sediments that have been undisturbed for years can stir up from the bottom. Under normal circumstances, this is minor. Some nutrients tick up briefly, nothing catastrophic. But Okeechobee's sediments are not normal sediments. They contain 70 years of accumulated agricultural runoff. Phosphorus concentrations in the lake bottom muck are among the highest ever recorded in a natural water body. And mixed in with the phosphorus is decades of organic matter. Dead algae, decomposed plant material, biological waste compressed into a layer of black mud nobody fully understood until it started moving. When the December 2024 release began, the lake bottom did not just stir, it mobilized. Clouds of legacy muck rose into the water column and got swept into the canals. And get this, as that muck-laden water flowed downstream, the organic matter started decomposing. Decomposition burns oxygen. When you have that much organic material breaking down at once, the dissolved oxygen in the water crashes. Hypoxia, low oxygen, in extreme cases, anoxia, water that cannot support life. The water leaving Okeechobee in December 2024 became hypoxic within hours. This is where Dr. Maya Chen comes in. Chen is a senior water quality scientist with the South Florida Water Management District. On the morning of December 19th, one day after the NOAA analyst made her phone call, Chen was in a research boat on the St. Lucie River with 2 technicians, pulling samples from a plume that was already visibly black. They lowered the dissolved oxygen probe over the gunnel. Chen watched the digital readout countdown. 8 milligrams per liter, 5, 3, 1.2, 0.4. Functionally dead water. The kind where a fish swimming in would suffocate within minutes. Then they ran the phosphorus screen. The result made Chen ask the technician to run it again, because the number was higher than anything she had personally pulled from a release event in 12 years on the job. The reading was off the calibrated upper end of the field instrument. They had to dilute the sample to get a reading at all. Chen later described the moment to colleagues with one sentence: "We just released 70 years of fertilizer in a week." What she did not yet know was where it was going to land: the black water. The plumes that appeared on NOAA satellite imagery within 48 hours of the release were visible because of one thing: tannins. Tannins are organic compounds released by decomposing plant matter, the same compounds that give tea its color. When you have massive quantities of decomposing material releasing tannins into water, the water turns dark, brown, then black. The water spreading down the St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee was dark enough to be distinguished from normal water at orbital altitudes. Sentinel-2 and Landsat satellites captured images of the plumes spreading like ink through the waterways. Within days, the black water reached the coastal estuaries. Within a week, it was visible in the near-shore waters of both the Atlantic and the Gulf. The color was striking. The implications were worse. The phosphorus Chen flagged in her samples was not just elevated. It exceeded anything previously recorded during a release event. The legacy mud at the bottom of the lake had been stirred up and was now flowing toward both coasts in concentrated form. The bacterial concentration suggested decomposing organic matter in quantities that would fuel algal blooms for months. 70 years of accumulated fertilizer delivered to 2 coastal ecosystems simultaneously, like fuel sprayed across a coastline already primed to burn. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection issued health advisories along both the Treasure Coast and the Lee County coast. Swimming was discouraged, fishing was warned against. Those advisories are still in effect, and the people who lived on those coasts were about to watch what 70 years of buried poison looks like when it arrives at their doorstep. The coasts collapse. Tommy Reyes has run a charter fishing operation out of Stuart, Florida for 23 years. On the morning of December 22nd, he walked down to his slip at the Sailfish Marina to prep his boat for a half-day trip. The water under the dock was the color of strong coffee. By the time he got to the bow, he was looking down at 3 dead snook floating belly up between the pilings. By the time he made it back to the dock house, his phone was already ringing. The clients were canceling. Everybody's clients were canceling. Reyes told a local reporter the water that week looked like it had come out of a wound. On the Treasure Coast, the St. Lucie River turned the color of dark chocolate. Fish kills began almost immediately. Mullet, snook, and baitfish floated belly up along the riverbanks. the smell of decomposition spread across waterfront neighborhoods. The Indian River Lagoon, already stressed from years of nutrient pollution, took another massive pulse of phosphorus and nitrogen. Scientists who had been monitoring the lagoon's slow recovery from the 2016 bloom watched water quality metrics collapse in real time. Seagrass beds, the foundation of the ecosystem, the feeding grounds for manatees, the nursery habitat for commercial fish, were smothered. Photosynthesis stopped. The grass began to die. Now, watch what happens next. Manatees in the Indian River Lagoon had already been dying in record numbers due to seagrass loss. Over 1,100 manatees died in Florida in 2021 alone, most from starvation. The December 2024 event threatened to trigger another mass mortality. On the West Coast, the Caloosahatchee carried the same toxic payload toward the Gulf. The water spreading into San Carlos Bay and around Sanibel and Captiva Islands was visibly discolored. Red tide had been present at low levels along the Gulf Coast. The nutrient pulse from Okeechobee provided exactly the fuel the Karenia brevis organisms needed to bloom explosively. Within weeks, red tide concentrations were spiking along the Lee County coast. Dead fish washed up on beaches. Respiratory irritation was reported by residents and tourists. The 2018 red tide caused an estimated $184 million in losses in Lee County alone. December 2024 hit both coasts at once. And the worst part is, nobody at the Corps, nobody at the district, nobody at the federal agencies tracking the plumes had a way to stop it once it started. The trap that cannot be fixed. So the question everybody started asking, fishing guides, biologists, county commissioners, the 8 million people downstream, was the same. Can this be fixed? The honest answer is probably not. The phosphorus that accumulated in Okeechobee's sediments over 70 years cannot be removed. There is no practical technology for extracting legacy nutrients from lake bottom muck at this scale. The contamination is permanent. The only options are management strategies that minimize disturbance of the sediments. Keep the lake stable. Avoid operations that create turbulence near the bottom. Accept that certain management actions are now off the table. But here is the part that makes this a trap. Those strategies conflict with everything else the lake has to do. The Herbert Hoover Dike is aging. Sections of the 143-mile levee are at risk of failure during major storms. When lake levels rise, the dike is stressed. Releases become necessary for safety. Climate change is intensifying Florida's rainfall. Wet seasons getting wetter, hurricanes getting more intense, and 8 million people still drink from this system. So the system is trapped. Keep the lake high, the dike is at risk. Lower the lake, the legacy pollution mobilizes. Send water south. The wetlands take a hit they cannot absorb. Send water to the coasts. The estuaries collapse. Every option is bad. December 2024 demonstrated just how bad. There was supposed to be a fix. Back in 2000, Congress authorized a federal-state partnership called the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, CERP for short. $10 billion, reservoirs, treatment marshes, infrastructure that would let Okeechobee water be stored and cleaned before it ever reached either coast. It is decades behind schedule. Political opposition, funding shortfalls, bureaucratic delays. The reservoirs are still in planning or early construction. December 2024 happened in the gap. The legacy infrastructure could not handle what came up from the lake bed, and the restoration infrastructure does not exist yet. And what happened in December 2024 is going to happen again. The legacy phosphorus is still in the lake. The sediments are still there. The next time water managers have to lower Okeechobee, the next hurricane season, the next wet winter, the next infrastructure emergency, the same dynamics play out. The only variable is how severe the next event will be. The preview nobody wanted here is the part that should keep you up at night. Lake Okeechobee is not unique. Across the United States, lakes and reservoirs that have served as agricultural sinks for decades face the same problem. The Great Lakes carry legacy pollution from a century of industrial activity. Chesapeake Bay struggles with nutrient runoff that has created dead zones for decades. The Mississippi River carries agricultural pollution from the entire Midwest to the Gulf, fueling a hypoxic zone the size of New Jersey. What happened at Okeechobee in December 2024 is a preview of what other systems are going to face, and a preview of what cannot be undone once it starts. Lake Okeechobee, Big Water, has been the beating heart of South Florida for centuries. The Calusa fished its waters, the Seminoles navigated its marshes, the agricultural industry built an empire on its shores. Now it is a reservoir of buried poison, waiting for the next disturbance. The wall we built around it after the 1928 hurricane was supposed to make the lake safe. It made the lake a trap instead. Everything that flowed in stayed in. In December 2024, we disturbed the sediments. What came out was 70 years of accumulated damage compressed into a single event, spread across 2 coastlines, visible from space. Both Florida coasts are now contaminated. The Indian River Lagoon is dying. The Gulf Coast is battling another red tide. And Okeechobee sits in the center, still full of legacy poison, still connected to 8 million people's drinking water. There is no solution. There is only management. And management just failed spectacularly. Lake Okeechobee is big water. What is in it is bigger, and it is not staying at the bottom anymore. If this story hit you the way it hit me, hit subscribe. We dig into one of these every week, and tell me in the comments, what other walled-off body of water do you think is holding 70 years of buried poison right now? I read every reply.